recording has started. All right, Jim, we're into season 10 of Mention and Dispatches. This is now longer than any previous podcast we've ever worked on.
I don't need to you don't need to make me feel any older than I already do. Dear God, man.
All right. That said, challenge accepted. I was looking for something today that we had covered in one of our old Dragging Up the Past videos. I think it was something squad leader related because Gary was talking about some squad leader stuff on his stream last night, and I was looking something up. And I was thinking, one, we need to bring this show back because it was a crap ton of fun, like sitting there listening to when we'd done the show. We need to bring it back because it was a ton of fun. We need way better audio than we had back then because we sounded like we were yelling through tin cans. We also need a wider variety and array of magazines to work on than just Dragon, because if you think about it, like there's the PDF copies out there of the old Space Gamers, of Ares, of Command, the General. There's a bunch of, like, Shadis magazine is now old enough that, like, if it were a kid, it would be on its second job out of college. So there's enough of these that we could dig into for a while, bring in some extra hosts, whatever. I think it would be a ton of fun to go back to. And I'm saying that without thinking about how much production and editing work I have to do on those videos. So the third voice that you're about to hear on our podcast tonight, we have with us a special guest, Mr. Cole Wehrle from Whirligig Games. And among other places, Cole, I know the list of places you've designed for is not short. What else is there besides Whirligig?
Well, I guess my day job is at Leader Games, so I always have to, like, sort of like being introduced to a friend at a wedding or something, like, which name are you going to list first? So here among friends, we can list Whirligig first. But I work at Leader Games. That's my full-time job, and I serve as the creative director there. And then I've published with Sierra Madre Games. I've done development work, lots of different places, lots of mentorship as well. Worked on all kinds of games.
Yeah, the Whirligig one always sticks out because it's the play on your last name. So that's why that's the one that I always default to.
We were tricking people into learning how to pronounce our last name, and it's worked pretty well.
It did work. It did in fact work. Cole, with you here talking Leader Games or any of those, are you allowed to tell us what the next game in the pipeline is, coming from the mind of Cole Wehrle?
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you what I work on. I'm not very secretive about my design practice. So like right now I am working on ARCs, and ARCs is the product I've worked on. I mean, it's up there with John Company. I think it's the longest active studio project at Leader Games. When I'm working on a game, I usually have a design journal, which I write in kind of every day. It's just a diary, really, of what I'm doing. And this is the first one where I've had to, like, really put years on the dates, because normally I can put months. But I'm like, oh, which of the 3 Februaries is this that I'm working in? So that's going to take a few more months to finish up. And then after that, there's more Oath stuff that has been preoccupying me. And then in the world of historical games, I'm working on Infamous Traffic. And then really a lot of my time for Whirligig is shepherding this little flock of new designs through the publication process. And so Drew and I have been working on, I mean, kind of half a dozen designs, most of which I can talk about. And they really run the gamut. For instance, we're of course working on the new edition of Infamous Traffic. We have a game about letter writing and matchmaking in Regency England that we're really excited about. We're working on a game about queer culture in the 1720s with a designer out of England named Joe Kelly, who's just fabulous and just a wonderful designer. And then we've also been helping this amazing team based in Singapore work on a game about the colonial history of Singapore, which is called right now 1819 Singapore, which is a bad title because people are going to ask me when the Fours rust. And that isn't the question I want anyone to ask me, because the game is so brilliant. And it really is. It's quite similar to a kind of PAX style game, except it's a city builder, and it is. It's really, you do get a sense of the history of Singapore when you play the game. And so, yeah, we're working on a whole lot of stuff. And then I have a few other projects. I've been noodling on this dang project about Reconstruction for years now, and it is still not quite right, but it's, it's just something that I'm cooking on. It takes me a long time to make these games.
Yeah. Jim, this is the point at which you get to make an Orange Crush joke. So,
What my friend refers to is the fact that he is intimately familiar with noodling on a game for roughly the lifetime of his children and likely his children's children.
To the point where it is overcome by current event. I started in 2007 working on a design that was a modern kinetic combat game, because again, like, we're wargamers here. That's what we do. But I was working on a modern kinetic combat something, and I was sort of looking around for, okay, so where are the next couple of flashpoints? And this was a year and a half to 2 years before GMT's Next War series started showing up.
Okay.
So I was actually ahead of them a little bit. They just, because they're GMT and they have their shit together, they got published a decade and a half and counting before I got around to mine. But I postulated a hypothetical near future war in Ukraine based on a fragmented government from protests around a disputed election, and the Russians decide to show up and protect the Russian minority. And this was 2007 when I was kicking that around.
Sure. All right.
And so 2014 shows up, and suddenly, I've got like Foreign Policy Magazine calling me going, "Hey, are you ever going to get around to publishing that thing?" Jesus, guys, come on. I finished designing it first. And of course, now it's completely overcome by current events, because the order of battle is jacked. Where the action takes place in the game is like 500 miles west of where everything's actually happening in Ukraine these days. The scale is hopelessly small for trying to encompass the entire Ukraine conflict now. You need like 6 games to do what I was trying to do. But yeah, I lived long enough to see my hypothetical near future now become recent history.
Sure. I mean, there's a Drew, my brother and I are big admirers of Robert Caro's work, and over the summer, we read his memoir. And this is the biographer who, so we'll spend 10, 15 years working on the next volume in his epic biography of LBJ. And there's a moment in his memoir where he talks about, I think it's after The Power Broker was published. So he finally had like a little bit of money, and he came to an arrangement with his publisher that basically said, you want a Pulitzer, why don't you just spend as much time as you need? And so he goes to this like special writing room in the New York branch of the public library. And or one of the branches of the New York Public Library. And in this room, he's just surrounded by all these historians who are working on these books. And, they're telling stories about like, oh yeah, they like spent a decade on that book and a couple decades on this one. And he was like, oh, so I'm not slow. I'm just working on a type of thing that takes a long time.
Yeah.
And this is, I think about this all the time, especially in the hobby market, because this is a big difference between the more historical gaming and the hobby market. In historical gaming, I find people who they're really embarking on their life's work, and you can see it. They're like, okay, they have been cooking on this game for a long time. And in the hobby market, there tends to be, but by this I mean, the more the mainstream walking around the halls of Gen Con, the flavor of the month stuff. What you're getting there is folks who are interested in trying to get a game published, trying to maybe make a career, or if not really make a career, it doesn't have to be that mercenary. Sometimes it's just they want to know what it is to make a game. And so, the turnaround time there is like 2 years or 1 year, which is just nothing. And that's something that, I had the good fortune to spend. I've had the good fortune to spend a little time with Mark Herman over the past few years when I go to Historicon in San Diego. And one of the things I'm always just so impressed by him for many reasons. But one of the things I was telling Drew when we were walking back to our hotel one night is, in the hobby game market, anyone who's clever can pretty quickly sit at the grown-ups table. Like a new designer who's only been working for a couple of years can probably design as well as I can design. But when I talk to wargamers, and especially wargame designers, they're like 20 or 30 years ahead of me. They've just read hundreds of more books than I have on the subject. And it is wonderful because it reminds me of the university, and it just reminds you of like how deep someone can go into a subject, and I just get completely entranced by it, because I love the fact that there's a part of this whole hobby that we're in where that level of expertise can be reflected in the quality of the work, which isn't to say that like a game that might show up at like Renegade or something isn't brilliant. It's just, it is reflecting a different kind of expertise.
There's so much. I'll say this right at the start, and this is not fanboy stuff. It's just true. You are the only hobby designer that I let creep into my historical war game space.
All right, I'll take it. Thanks.
And that has been true since John Company 1, which blew my head apart. And I don't think I'm going to let you walk away from that statement that easily. One of the things, and this is not, I wrote down 7 questions, and this isn't one of them, so I'm kind of mad at myself. But based on what you just said, The gaming space in the past 15 years has changed radically. We were, if you walked around Gen Con, which I haven't gone to in a while, but I was when it was here in Milwaukee, I went, and we're talking decades and decades ago. Games didn't look like they do now. They were, yes, you had your Hasbro games, funny enough. Sure. You had your Milton Bradley and Parker Brothers. I still remember the guy trying to sell Battle Masters at Gen Con who looked like a washing machine salesman. He was my age, wearing a tacky suit, trying to talk to us nerds about, hey, come play with these GW miniatures. It's a game you'll like, kids. And it comes with this hose expansion. But all that having been said, it has changed so dramatically. The hobby space has exploded in a way that's actually kind of absurd to me.
Yes.
And I say absurd in the classical sense, which is to say I have a hard time processing it. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that has done is opened up this horrible debate, which I have no intention of relitigating tonight, which is what is a war game? But what that has done, and when you said, by the way, Historicon, you freaked me out. I'm like, what are you doing hanging out in Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, moving lead?
Oh, yeah, sorry. SD HistCon.
SD HistCon, yeah, Harold's gig. And, which I'll hail to that, too. What that has done and what Harold is doing is trying to say, hey, let's take this hobby space stuff and drag it over here into this groggy space, and maybe some of you crusty old bastards can figure something out and maybe show more accessible ways of approaching not just war games, but other forms of conflict simulation. All this by lengthy prologue to you share justly, I think, your respect for the passion that a lot of the grogs bring to their games. I'm thinking of Patrick Mullen and his Long Dry Summer, and his Hot Dry Summer on Vietnam, which is just, it's clearly a labor of his heart, and he's done it for so long, and he's worked it for so long. But surely you can't do a game like John Company and make it feel as right as it does without a pretty profound level of historical research. It would ring false otherwise, it seems to me.
Oh, I mean, and John Company is the product of a lot of work. I mean, I started working on that game back in 2009, and it working on it in particular because I couldn't secure a copy of Republic of Rome, which is the game I wanted to play, because I was so interested in the idea of using a conflict simulation framework to do institutional history rather than military history.
Yes.
And at that period, if you were hunting for a copy of Republic of Rome, you'd go to eBay and they'd all be $150. And I was literally like barely able to fill up my gas tank. We were so broke. And so I was just sort of like sketching out. I mean, the origins of my, I think like a lot of people, I wanted to make a game because I just wanted to play it. I didn't care about selling the game. That was purely secondary. And then that led me to actually saying, well, I don't really know enough to make the game, so I'm going to start reading about it and build from there. But I have a weird relationship to I'm just going to call it the industry, because that's what I call it. But I don't mean to like give it any special place. It's just the industry I work in. Because I really feel like an interloper. I straight stumbled into this whole career that I'm currently in, and there are a lot of reasons why it happened. But when I'm at Gen Con, I go to a dinner with other designers at some of the companies in our little market segment. I don't really have that much in common with them. We want really different things. And when I go spend time in San Diego with the GMT developers, I feel like kindred spirits because they are approaching problems with a very similar tact. And so when you talked about the hobby 15 years ago, I know precisely what you mean, because the first Gen Con I went to was 2004, I think 2005.
Oh, you sweet summer child.
I know. Well, I think I'm 36.
Oh, God bless you.
But I kind of like, I got sort of like weirdly grandfathered in, because my first game experience, my dad taught me, Risk and chess, Stratego. We played those as kids, very young. And then my uncle, when I was probably 9 or 10, he said, I found a bunch of old games in the closet. You can have them. And he dropped on my lap hopelessly incomplete copies of Tactics 2, Blitzkrieg, Chancellorsville, just beat to hell. Split all the boards, split at the seams, the boxes. I remember, and this took an embarrassing amount of time to figure out that Chancellorsville didn't have the right pieces. it actually had the pieces from, I think, Waterloo maybe or something. And I like as a kid, I don't even know. Like I remember trying to decode. I have this visceral memory of me. I think I must have been a fourth grader or something. But I remember trying to figure out how a combat results table worked without really knowing what a ratio was.
Oh dear.
And it was mystifying. I looked at this table and I would read the rules, and of course, those old rule books are not going to help you if you don't know.
Oh no, they are the exact opposite of how to learn a game.
I think about it's at school. I played in the school library. The librarian was kind enough to like give us her back closet for a little game group that I had, and I had found a copy of Prados' Third Reich at a garage sale, and we were playing it. I mean, sort of. I mean, we were just role playing. I mean, it was really just nonsense what we were doing. But I remember halfway through the game, somebody figured out how the CRT worked. Again, it's not that complicated of a game, but like some element of it. I mean, it might not.
Yeah,
even
but that's just so funny.
Well, and then what happened is it was this revelation that like suddenly I went home and I remember taking out Tactics 2 and saying like, oh, I know how this works now. And then I was teaching it to Drew, and I mean Drew is 5 years younger than me, so of course he's like in first grade. I'm like, no, you put your counters there, you stack up, add our little strength points, and then you figure out the smaller stack, you divide it into the bigger stack. And I was trying to explain all this to him because it was decoding all of these dusty old war games. And then around the same time, I had a friend who had some older relative who was in the more of the avant-garde of essentially the German invasion. And so he, for his birthday, would get a copy of Puerto Rico or his Princess of Florence. And this is like circa 2003 or 2002, or like right when those games were coming out.
Sure.
And so I got to, my BGG count dates to about this time. And so I got to sort of like ride a little bit of the hobby wave with a bunch of people who were probably, I was like, the little jerk kid on the forums who was probably 15 years younger than anyone else. And in fact, if you go deep into my BGG account, you're going to find all sorts of embarrassing shit that I wrote when I was, a middle schooler, basically. Because it's just been around that long, but wargaming was the central kind of foundation for it. I mean, those were the games that like I liked playing. I've more recently found myself going back into it a little bit, and have been. I know there's a lot to say about that, but I understand precisely what you mean when you talk about that shift. Because when I started getting into games, I remember going into there weren't really game stores in the part of in northern Indiana, but there was a comic book shop that would have like a little shelf of games in the corner. And I remember that when I was looking through the games, all they had were like 3 Ogre expansions from the late 80s, and not knowing what Ogre was, thinking like, what is this? And they'd clearly just never sold, and they were just sitting there. And then something,
like the ownership changes of the store.
Yeah, and they're like, I don't know what this. And actually, one of my favorite things to do, and you could do this until a couple years ago. You kind of can't do it anymore. But I love going when I'm in a city to go to like a strange hobby shop. Like, take me to the model planes shop, because what you'll probably find in some dark corner is a bunch of weird Euros that ownership ordered like in 2001. And that never sold. And so like I have all these Leo Colvini games like Meridian and I think my copy of Carolus Magnus, which like I bought at like a model train store for $5 because they didn't know what it was. And so I'm always hunting for those things. But I remember a moment very, very precisely where like around 2004, and I mean here like it was the second edition of Twilight Imperium, and then those early Eagle Griffin games. Like Napoleon in Europe, the American Civil War.
Well, he was just Eagle back then.
Glenn
exactly. Glenn hadn't found that Griffin.
Yep, that's right. It was just Eagle Games, and I remember buying a copy of Napoleon in Europe, and it rocked my world. And the thing is, and I actually like a lot of Glenn's work. I think that game is not good.
No, it's not at all.
Yeah,
and Glenn is a very good friend, and I've told him so, and I think he knows it. But anyway,
yeah, it is. Well, and I actually. It is remarkable that company was as successful as it was for so long, given the quality of the games. And I think it has to do with the fact that there wasn't like the kind of design, traditions, discourse, superstructure that like makes good designs happen that exists outside of the company. It just wasn't in place.
Correct. That's exactly right. Because who is going to come and there was nothing like that. They're just and there was no external. You'll hear people now say, "Have you taken your design to another developer? Have you talked to them about it? Have you kicked it around?" You could do that now. What was Glenn going to do? Who did he have to talk to but a bunch of crusty old grognards who weren't going to play with plastic toys?
Right. Exactly. So there are these like weird unhooked games. And regardless, I've played every scenario in Napoleon in Europe. Every single scenario. I played the grand campaign. We did the battle boards. I left it set up in my parents' basement for a month to do the big scenario, and we all had a great time at it. Even though the game itself just doesn't work. But that had always been. I mean, the thing that was so remarkable about that game was it was the first game in what felt like, I mean, I can just with historical perspective know, like since the Milton Bradley Game Master games, that was trying to do like what we might think of as like the AAA historical game, the AAA board game that says like, no, this is glitzed out. It's got this ridiculous painted map. And it was obviously coming after a long drought, right?
Yeah, they were trying to out Fantasy Flight at the time.
Yeah, but even there, Fantasy Flight had hardly started doing this.
Yeah, I was going to say that predates Fantasy Flight.
Because like Twilight Imperium 2 is like pretty ugly.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of what Fantasy Flight became known for, Glenn was actually ahead of that curve because they weren't at Gen Con when I first got my order. I got the artist when Glenn was selling it at Gen Con. He had a big booth with all these things stacked up, and I remember I got my one copy of Napoleon in Europe autographed by both him and the artist, and then I bought a second copy because that framed map is still on my wall.
Oh, yeah. See, I knew I liked you, Jim.
No, I love it. Because to your point, yeah, in retrospect, knowing what we do of mechanics and know what we do of all the other things that go into gaming, yeah, but this was giving me my toys back. Yeah. And I've told Glenn this. I said, I'll always forgive that game and Civil War and Combat and the others because they gave me the joy back. The joy of, would you look at this bad MRFer?
Yeah. Well, and also he was on the bleeding edge of the market trend, the fragmentation that would make this entire industry possible. I mean, like in there are many game companies right now. I mean, if we're talking about it crassly, we're just talking about selling toys to people with disposable income. But like to properly activate that market segment, he was right on the edge of doing that. And of course, whenever I hear people bemoan Kickstarter, I always say like Kickstarter is a branch of the tree. It is just one other like reflection moment element of a larger trend that's been happening over the last 30 years, or even more, really. I mean, I would say about 30 years, where it's just a certain class of folks got access to disposable income, and there are now places, principally, digital places where people can congregate and talk about these things. You get all these communities happening, and you see the same trends happen in, my father-in-law is really into like remote controlled sailboats. And they also in those communities talk about like, wow, wasn't it crazy when they introduced like forums? And then suddenly people could have their own little businesses out of their garage, making small kits to super fans. And when I hear him talk about those things, I'm like, oh, that's a smaller version of what's happening in board games.
It's astounding how far ahead of most hobby market trends the wargamers have been over the years. And that's the thing that you talk to some people that are like, oh yeah, I've been a big board game fan for 20 years. Like, that's cute. And it's not an issue of gatekeeping. Part of it is just sort of understanding some historical perspective. When people want to start talking about, oh yeah, Kickstarter really made crowdfunding. Kickstarter didn't start crowdfunding. The wargamers been doing P500 stuff since the late 90s.
Right.
Kickstarter's founders were in middle school when GMT launched their first P500. And the idea of campaign games with multiple expansions have been around forever in the wargaming space, going back to Avalon Hill days, and so there's this whole series of things that people are like, man, folks should start doing this with different types of board games. There was a column on like medium.com, one of the board game publications on there, where somebody was talking about why don't board games have a common rule set that learn once and play a bunch. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, did you miss the Carcassonne series of games? But I'm also thinking of like Mark Simonich's 40X series, the Advanced Squad Leader universe, literally every block game ever made by Columbia. They all work on, all of those guys work on the same mechanics. Every Commands and Colors game ever. Yep. Like if you learn the mechanic, you've got it. The wargamers have been doing this crap for decades, and it's like Can the rest of y'all like not take credit for the stuff you're ripping off from the wargamers? You know?
Yeah, it is a funny dynamic. It's so often I feel like we have some staff, including some younger developers, and I end up like being the person on staff who like pulls out a game that's 20 or 30 or 40 years old to say, look, actually this dynamic has already been used here, and it's really important to learn that. And it's interesting because myself and one of our staff at Leader, Josh Yearsley, who's our rules editor, we both kind of come from more of a wargaming background. And when I hang out with him, you know, he came to visit. We were working on ARCs, and he lives in Massachusetts, but he'll come for a few weeks to do playtesting and things. And we spent our evenings playing South Pacific. And all day we were just talking about these, you know, curious, clever, wonderful elements from South Pacific that felt so fresh. And of course, that game system is quite old.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how so often I want to tell folks, you know, people always ask me like, "Oh, what was the most innovative game you saw at PAX Unplugged?" And I'm like, "Well, I haven't seen anything half as innovative as Atlantic Chase."
Yeah, and they have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, they have no idea. I mean,
I first want to say that my same comment I made about John Company applies to PAX Premier, both of which I adore like a child. I just don't think I'm going to let you completely walk away with the idea that those aren't deeply researched, profoundly well-researched games, actually. As well-researched, in fact, better researched than even some war games I could mention, which I won't bother to slag them in the present conversation, which has been very positive. But that having been said, and we're talking about mechanics, we're talking about borrowing mechanics. I was poking through your website, and I went and I had an I'm sorry what moment. You're borrowing the tactical chit draw mechanic from Empires in Arms for Arc. Not that it's negative. You know, I love that, but I do. Sure. I guess what I'm going to say is explain yourself.
Well, and you know, I'll explain that it didn't work, and actually, it was one of those moments where I adore Empires in Arms, and it's also a mess. I think that design's a mess, but I also think that
it's a howling mess. Are you kidding?
But it's a mess that excites me, and there's a group here in the Twin Cities that plays it occasionally, and I really want to get in one of their games. But one of the things that I think a lot. So what I'm going to say is going to mean nothing in present company, because every historical game designer is going to tell you the same thing, which is that they're preoccupied with questions of scale. You like can't escape it. And in the hobby market, if I'm making a game about dragons, no one cares about scale. And so it was funny. I was having a conversation with Patrick about a game that he's working on, and I said, your fundamental problem here is scale, and I was expressing it just as in a wargaming sense. And Patrick's a smart guy; he's played lots of war games, but I felt like at some level what I was saying didn't really resonate, because he is so much more interested in story, and the kinds of stories like in a fantasy setting have these kind of telescoping scales where sometimes you're having second breakfast and sometimes you're leading a great host. Where this brings me to the chit pull in Empires in Arms is, I love the chit pull, because it's not a chit pull, it's the blind bit. I love it because if you are trying to imagine the scale at which Empires in Arms works and how much control like a high command is going to have over a battle, well, they're going to pick an approach and the other side's going to pick an approach, and then we're going to resolve and see what happens. Mm-hmm. And like that to me is like fundamentally true and correct. But so I tried to put it in arcs because I was like, okay, arcs maybe has a similar scale. I'll do it that way. And I ran into a hilarious problem, which is that many times in conflict games, when you go to the moment of conflict resolution, you will have certain rules. Let's say the attacker has, a certain advantage or whatever. And then the combat is really just a chore. It's just a little, I mean, it's one of the, this is a classic moment of wargaming where like the combat rules I find are like always the most boring part of a set of wargaming rules, because I'm just going through the chore of the designer telling me what they think is best. And all the other stuff around the combat is the stuff I'm really fascinated. But like the actual moment of like going through, and I'm relearning right now Zucker's operational games, which are
we'll get there. But go ahead.
Yeah, it was so fascinating. But his like
that's the reason you're here.
The 14-step combat resolution in Napoleon at Bay, which I do think is brilliant in a lot of ways, is still like the part of the design that feels so kludgy. And I'm like, there's got to be a better way. But anyway, all this is to say that the very simple thing that we realized when we were working on ARCs was if you have a combat system that rewards skill, what's going to happen is players with weaker armies who are better players are going to win. Obviously, right?
Yeah, sure.
But they're going to win very consistently, which is why, like, if you were to have a combat system that used rock paper scissors, let's say, and one player was just an ace at reading the other player's mind, which of course happens in rock paper scissors all the time, the whole game is going to fall apart because it's going to start feeling unnatural. It's going to start feeling wrong for a very small force to rout a huge force just because the general was so brilliant. And so what I hit upon, which is something that a lot of war game designers before me have already know, is you have to assume the basic competency like up the chain of command. So like the enemy, even if you're a smarter general at a higher level than your opponent, the guys on the ground know how to load their guns and fire them at each other. And so what we found was, as we were giving players more control over the combat, if we designed a sort of blind bid that had a rock paper scissors style countering system built in, it produced results that felt, I mean, anachronistic is a funny word to use in a science fiction game, but it felt wrong. It just felt wrong. And so the system basically evolved into something where, as the attacker, you choose an attack profile, and then which is basically, in the context of this game, picking different types of dice. You roll those dice. The dice explain how the attack went. But we actually took the defender out of the equation because we just are the system assumes the defender always did the appropriate thing. And maybe you got a little bit more lucky or a little bit less lucky, but I can't give the players full control over that, or they're just going to stomp each other into the ground and the game isn't going to work. Anyway, that's a long answer, but no, it's a good example of like me going and pilfering through my old 80s war games.
I guess I'm a little sorry to see it go. I'd like to.
Well, I really wanted to make it happen. I tried to make it work in Oath too, and Oath's combat originally was like a deconstruction of the Dune wheel.
Yeah.
And I got it to work, but a funny thing happened, which was that combat was so interesting that it just took too long. And I kept getting comments from playtesters saying, I really like the game, I really like combat, but combat kind of should just be its own game. And so I have this like free floating, like just a combat system without a home that I might go somewhere, but it's hard. I mean, when you sit down to make a game like that and you have to answer a question like, well, how many combats are there going to be? Okay, well, there's 15 per game. Well, if each one takes 6 minutes to resolve, then my God, there's not time for anything else.
Well, okay, just for the record, there's where we see these big brick walls that sit between the grogs and the hobby gamer. We're sitting there going, well, yeah, of course, it's at least 4 hours for combat, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Don't be ridiculous. But see, I get a segue out of this, and this is on my list. I realize you're not going to be able to talk about details and everything like this, but just qualitatively, has Oath sold well?
Yeah, Oath has done great.
Has it?
Yeah, we just got to. There's a funny thing. I think everyone, even the people who like Oath, are surprised.
I do like Oath, and I'm surprised.
Yeah. No, it surprises us too. I mean, they had to stop inviting me to print run meetings because I'm such a curmudgeon. I always say like, don't print it. I don't want us to fill our garages with this game. And Oath sold through its first print run instantly, and these are sizable print runs. And then its second print run, it sold through very well. And then the third print run, it's moving through at a reasonable pace. It's like not. Oath is selling. It's like, I mean, it doesn't sell as well as Root. I mean, part of the problem is Root is on just a very different trajectory. And when we put Oath next to Root, it's like, well, Oath looks like a failure. But if we put Oath next to anything else we've done, it's an extremely steady seller. And and that's why we're going to support it with expansions. I mean, people.
It was that tripped the question when I was reviewing the website that I saw you're doing an expansion, and it was exactly the comparison that you're talking about that led to my question also, which is obviously Root has been this monster for you, this unstoppable Leviathan. I'm expecting Root the animated series before very long, but which would be awesome, by the way. Just saying.
I can't say anything.
Shut the front door.
Cannot confirm or deny. I mean,
that would be more spectacular than words. I would be in anyway. I volunteered a voiceover, but but what I really wanted to get at was when Oath came out, we all had Root. We were all having a good time with Root. And all of a sudden I start going through Oath going, what the hell? It's a radically different game in some ways.
Yeah.
Particularly in terms of group commitment and length. And this is something that Brant and I talk about all the time. There are a lot of RPG people. There's even some board game people who look over here at D&D people or at war game people and go, your rules are too complicated. Your games are too long. Your games are too complex. And we say, what are you talking about? Look at the game you've built. You haven't heard that, huh? From people who have to sit down with a game like Oath, which is awesome.
Well,
but as you sit down and play it, you're like, are you kidding?
No, and we do certainly hear it, but there's a thing about, I mean, Oath is funny. So it and John Company, there's a lot. Boy, I could talk about Oath all day. Oath was developed during the pandemic. It's the most important thing to know about Oath because we got the core design done. We went to Kickstarter. I made some adjustments and then I had some radical ideas about the design, but then suddenly pandemic shut everything down. And so we moved all of our testing to Discord and it changed everything. The game development has changed more in the past 3 years from how I understand talking to older designers than from the past 30. And it has entirely to do with shifting playtesting to digital spaces, having the onus of kit creation, which used to be a nightmare. I used to try to get my kits, the PDFs ready for the testers on Monday, hoping that they could assemble one by Friday and knowing that they were going to have a horrible time convincing all their friends to help them cut out cards and to teach them the new rules. And so whenever I would make these Gantt charts kind of with my playtesters, and Root was certainly like this, where I'd say, okay, you're like my wave 3 playtesters. You're kind of good at the end, but I know that even a good playtesting group isn't going to get more than 4 or 5 games before they burn out. And Oath changed that because now I can push a version on Friday. Well, it did 2 things. One, all of those game groups that fell apart, it kind of like little electrons. I have these little free radicals. All these people who want to play test, but they don't want to bum out their groups, are now without groups. And so they could come to our testing Discord and find like-minded people. And then that gets coupled with the fact that creating a new fresh Oath kit is something I do. I build the kit, I post it on a Friday afternoon with the patch notes. People are instantly queuing up to get into games. And then Friday night, there's 3 or 4 games running. And it has been so exciting. I don't know if either of you are very involved in the coin Discord or the campaign and levy Discord that Voco helps run. But those communities, that's the exact same trend that we saw in our pandemic testing, where suddenly I had infinite testing bandwidth. I'd never had access to so much testing bandwidth, but it also changed the nature of the design. It made the design, instead of us taking Oath to every local con and to constantly me teaching it to new players, I was instead just teaching it to people who had played a lot of Oath. And so Oath got 6 times as much testing as Root. And we had people who got into the hundreds of games of Oath. And even after Oath shipped, I noticed that people were still using the testing Discord to gather for games. And I would get messages from folks saying, oh, I'm like, I think the game really opens up like around round 30. I'm like, okay, this is different. Because normally when I'm working on a game, I think that I get lucky because I can tell, I make a bargain. I try to make a bargain with players that says, you might have a rocky first few games, but like get to game 4, get to game 5. And I feel so like just privileged. I feel so blessed when someone says, you know what, the 3rd game of Pamir is when it really started clicking. Because in the whole hobby market, so much of the design practice is oriented towards the good first experience and sometimes even the good first turn. And I say, no, screw that. You're going to make lots of mistakes. And what I was finding though with Oath is people saying like, no, actually go even farther, get 10 games in, get more. And so what we found with Oath sales is that we sold very well to the core audience. And then for about half of the core audience, they were out. They were like, this is not Root, not really into it. So you had a bit of a wave in the secondary market, people offloading their Kickstarter copies, people being futzy about it. And then starts finding a bit of a second audience. And now Oath is in a spot where it is like selling very consistently, and people who buy that game know exactly what they're getting, which is right where we want it to be. And I think the people who went into Oath expecting like Root 2, they didn't get it. They bounced, and where they bounced to, thankfully, was just back to Root because we had an expand coming for them or whatever. And I'm very interested to see how Arcs lands, because Arcs is right in between them, where I think that it is so much more, in some respects, it's a lot more like Root, but in other respects, it's even wilder. And I could see it hopefully bringing those two groups of people together, or pushing them further apart. I have no idea.
Harold is forever Harold Buchanan, by the way. Sorry, I shouldn't really do that.
Sure, Harold.
And we all speak of Harold only by his first name. He's like
Correct.
Madonna and Elvis and Cher.
Yes.
Harold Buchanan is forever winding on about how he wants to see wargaming expand. There's no game that has done more of that than Root. There just isn't. I can't tell you how many people I've said, you want to know if you're going to like Distant Plane or if you're going to like any of the coin games, try Root. Mm-hmm. Tell me if you can handle it. And then if you want to add the history into the mix, it's a great training wheels, but it's also an astonishingly good game in its own right. To me, it's I wonder how you manage. Do you think about that? Do you think about that crossover? Or are you feeding the hobby market and hoping we grogs just get it because it's good for us?
No, I don't try to make like a hit. I don't. I mean, I try to make a game that I would like. It's the old simple.
You realize how many designers right now are cussing at this podcast if they're even listening to it? They're like, "Guy doesn't try to make a hit. He's got 3 of the best games of the last 20 years."
Well, look. There's always going to be a hit every Gen Con, and the game that everyone's playing or whatever. And I remember the year Root came out, which was really wild. I mean, actually, and I'll tell you a story about Harold. I had dinner with Harold because Harold. I mean, this was hardly before Root Root hadn't really come out. Some of the Kickstarter backers had it, but Harold. I think I had talked to Harold about John Company maybe, and he invited me to dinner the night before Gen Con 2018. So this is like literally the day before Root comes out, and we had a very nice dinner with some friends, and we went to a bar and chatted. And he asked me about Root's release, and I said, "Look, we played a game right before we shipped the files to the factory, and it was a great game. Everyone, we were standing up by the end of it. We were so engaged, but it was so mean and strange that at the end of the game, we all said we have no idea. Like we've just lost the farm. We have no idea if people are going to like this game." And I looked at Harold and said, "Look, I know some Kickstarter backers have gotten it. Some people like it. I don't know how it's going to do tomorrow. I'm not. This isn't coming from false modesty. I just don't know. But I'm happy it got made the way it got made." And the next day, the line like literally goes out the door. We're in this tiny little stall at the back of the hall, and the line to get the copies that we brought with us goes all the way down the hall. Every one of those poor booths was cursing at us because we had our people just snaking through their booths. And in the evening, of course, Gen Con, especially then, there were no places to actually play games. It's the worst part of Gen Con. But I'm walking through the hotels, and there are always people playing Root on the floor. And what I'm seeing is not dollar signs. I'm not seeing like, I'm not like swelling with pride. What I'm seeing is a bunch of people throwing dice, shouting at each other, playing a fundamentally interactive conflict game. And how nice it is, there's always going to be a flavor of the year. How nice it is for that moment to have the flavor be a whole type of game that I really care about.
Yeah.
And I think that's how I approach that kind of stuff.
Yeah, you set a war game in a petting zoo, and suddenly everybody was willing to play it.
Yeah, it wasn't. Yeah, exactly. I mean, who knew? Yeah, but it is. There's a bit of a funny push and pull, and it's created this like really virtuous circle where I love talking to Gene about this stuff because I always say like, Gene, I owe you a huge debt of gratitude. GMT is so important to me, and he's like, well, know that that it comes right back to us too, and so we're both helping each other. And there's such a feel, and I think that is actually very different. I find this is one of the things I love about the historical gaming space is that there's a real sense that the water level is going to bring all the boats up. Because if someone spends a lot of time with Root, they're going to pick up a Distant Plane. And what's more, they're going to like it. They're probably going to have a better experience with it than if they had just picked it up randomly.
Yeah.
Which is great. Yeah. So we want more of that.
I have a funny relationship with a Distant Plane, and some of the listeners have heard this before, but I always joke that I claim like 9% of the credit for the fact that a Distant Plane even exists. Volko met Brian Train when I booked the two of them onto the same panel at Connections in 2010 or 2000. Oh,
that's great.
At the National Defense University. Joe Miranda and I were the panel co-chairs for a panel that year, and I brought in Volko and Brian. He brought Roger Mason in, but that was when Volko and Brian met each other. Now, look, they were going to meet each other sooner or later, and a distant plane was going to happen sooner or later. But I always joke that, the fact that I threw the two of them on a panel together is how distant plane. It's just I think you're fundamentally right in that largely across the wargaming industry, there's a lot of there's probably more cooperation than competition, especially amongst a lot of the freelancers and the designers, the artists, and the content folks, and a lot of the players. That there's a lot of cooperation, a lot more than competition. I think there's going to be some competition at the business end of some of those companies because they're going after the same dollars from the same people, largely. There are a couple of personality conflicts out there. There are two well-known publishers that don't like each other at all. And Jim remembers the year they were both at Origins, and we joked about putting them across the aisle from each other so we could set up a popcorn booth down at the end cap and just make all of our money back selling popcorn and renting bleachers to watch these guys. I think you're largely correct. I mean, things have been pretty Jim started it's funny, you talk about sort of how things shifted during the pandemic to a lot of the online playing. Jim started Saturday Night Fights. What was it? It was 8 months before the pandemic, Jim.
We are now well into our 4th year.
Yeah. So it was the summer before the pandemic when they started with Saturday Night Fights, with playing online with Tabletop Simulator. And so, when the pandemic hit, we just all kind of shrugged and said, all right, we're going to keep doing this because it already works. When the pandemic hit and all the conventions got shut down, we had no idea what we were doing, but we pulled a virtual convention together that summer for the Dragoons. And then Harold's calling me up going, okay, how did you do that? I'm like, all right, let's get on a conference call and let's talk about it. And then that fall, SD HisCon did a virtual one. It's one of those cases where there's a lot of cooperation amongst the group. And I think you're right. I think it's a lot more congenial than some of the other hobby spaces.
Here comes the 10th season of the Armchair Dragoons podcast, mentioned in dispatches. Let's thank all of our Patreon supporters who pledged at the top level. A huge thank you to Stagger Wing, Patrick Garrity, Fred and his dog, Mike Quigley, Joseph Knorr, Hethwell Wargames, Robert, Patrick Mullen, Kevin Bertram, Chet Bell and Chab Corey for their support of the Armchair Dragoons and helping us to bring you the best strategy gaming content on the web. You too can sign up as a Patreon supporter at patreon.com/armchairdragoons.
All that said, we're now 50 odd minutes into this podcast, and we have yet, other than a passing mention, to bring up Zucker's Napoleonic games, which was like the whole reason we dragged you into this.
Well, all right. So we're in the Zucker zone. Only Zucker from here on out.
All right, Zucker. Oh, sweet. Well, I have a hat for that. Give me a sec.
Okay.
But I figured
I'm
Jim
expecting
had
your avatar to change.
Yeah, that's the hat.
Of Jim's 7 questions, I figured 9 of them were about Napoleonic War games.
Well, yeah, and Brant and I both saw it pretty much, I think, at the same time when you posted, Cole, about sort of entering into this gestalt with Kevin's work. I have adored Napoleon's Last Battles is my favorite game, bar none.
Awesome.
I will play it forever. I have 4 copies of it, including the designer edition. I can't tell you how close I came to buying Gary Gygax's copy when it came up. That's just why, because I don't know, because it was Gary's copy.
Does Don still have it?
Yeah, he does. I look at it every now and again, and my finger hovers over the buy button.
For folks that don't know, the Don to whom we are referring is the guy that runs Enterprise Games out in Indianapolis. That's the mail order secondhand war game place. Got a ton of fantastic stuff, but they're also very nice people. They are the official GMT rep at Origins every year, and they are a major supporter of our war game space. They help broker the support that GMT provides to us, but they also tie in a lot of our stuff, and we end up sending a lot of our players over to their booth to buy games after we're done.
Yep, 100%. So I guess I'll start here and say, obviously you had some experience of the Zuckerverse before this most recent journey. When did you first start bumping into that stuff?
So let's see. Let me think. Okay, so there's a funny. I'm trying to think about the beginning of it, because I had played when I was in. Okay, when I got right when I was about to leave to Texas, I worked as a social worker very briefly before graduate school, and I had started playing war games again then, and was playing. I learned ASL and was just sort of like thinking about kind of the heavier hex encounter games, and had feelings about them. So ASL, I mean, again, we're in the Zuckerverse talking about Zucker, but Advanced Squad Leader, it bothered me. I really enjoy it, but it bothered me because I felt like I was playing a movie and I wasn't actually playing like a simulation, which is funny to say of ASL, which gets flack for being so simulationist. But I'm like, no, the way the eye of command floats around that map is like, we might as well be in a comic book. And so because I just sort of Google like, all right, command control. And I started finding that a lot of the games that are really dealing with questions of command and control, well, they're 19th century war games, or they're war games about the 19th century, which makes perfect sense, of course. And I happened to, at a Gen Con auction, buy a copy of, is it called Struggle of Nations? That's it.
Oh, yes. Oh, okay. That's where you start. Okay.
Well, I remember I've heard about this Zucker guy. And I remember opening it up and just looking at those tiny hexes, the size of watch batteries.
Yeah.
And thinking, Jesus Christ, what have I gotten myself into? And it, like everyone who has ever owned that game, I never played it. But I did read the rules, and I was very intrigued by what was going on. And that led me to get a copy of Napoleon at Bay, the old Avalon Hill one with the very blue cover, which I kind of liked. I know people hate that cover, but it's so insane that I kind of like it. I've come all the way back around on it. And I played that and was very struck by it. And again, I don't think I was serious about my engagement with it. And by which I mean, I made a lot of rules mistakes and I didn't really care, because I was mostly like soloing it. And then I taught it to a friend of mine in Austin, and we like kind of played around in it, but we weren't being like rigorous about it. But I was like, okay, there's something here. And then I kind of unplugged from Zucker's work, and I experimented with some Napoleonic games. The play-by-mail game Flight of the Eagles, which I'm sure you know about, I adored. Theoretically, it was one of those like,
I'm running a game now, so careful.
Oh no! My dance card is so full. But it was one like I read the rules and was completely taken with it. And then actually that kind of segued me into like the world of naval war games. And I was playing a lot of close action and really getting into, because I mean that's the command and control stuff. We used to play Wooden Ships and Iron Men, and every turn in the signal phrase, I would have people like put a little Post-it on a pencil and like raise their little flags, and you only had 3 seconds to read them.
Yeah.
And then get him back down, because we wanted the fog of war. But I had known that Zucker, I had followed his career like from a distance. And I knew that, like, he had some health issues and then went into like a healing practice. And I remember thinking like, well, I would love to explore his campaign games at some point. And then when he came back in the kind of like mid-aughts, he was doing the Library of Napoleonic Battles, or the entries that would become the Library of Napoleonic Battles. I don't know if they were called that initially.
No,
he did like 4 Lost Battles, right? And I remember looking at them and saying like, I don't really care about the tactical stuff. It's just as a matter of personal preference. So I ignored it, but I signed up to the dang newsletter. And so of course every month I'm getting a newsletter that's telling me about, which volume's coming out. And we're thinking like, my God, why not like do the campaign series? Give me the 1X and the 2X and the 5X. Like, I don't want these tactical games. And then I happened to get invited to do this kind of like wargaming book club where, every couple months they pick a new system, and they had invited me on to just talk about like root and coin games, and we had a good time. And then they said, if you want to stick around, you're welcome to stick around. And I said, okay, well, what are you playing next? And they said, well, we're going to do the Zucker's library. And they said they want to approach it from the perspective of Jim Dunnigan's Napoleon at Waterloo.
Sure.
And then Napoleon's Last Battles, and then do the library and understand the evolution of this kind of like system.
Nice.
Which was lovely. So I played Napoleon at Waterloo, which I thought it's fine. I mean, it's like, it's one of those things that it's so remarkable, but it's something I'd never play in the context of the time. And then I had played some of Napoleon's Last Battles many years ago, which I liked a lot, quite a bit. And so I was kind of going through, and I was like, oh, this is very interesting, because I've had an academic interest in these Hex Encounter Napoleonic games for a while, but because I'm not interested in the scale, I never really got that deep into it. And then after I played Last Battles, I was like, well, I don't even know if I'm going to play the library games. Maybe I'll just read the rules. And I read the rules, and I was so struck by them. And part of it is the pleasure of encountering a really mature wargaming system that you could just tell that every single rule has just been hammered, right? There's not a weird knob. I mean, there are some weird knobs. We can get into that. But like, every element is something that what was talked about. And so I messaged my brother and said, Drew, I'm learning these weird wargames. Do you want to learn them with me? And he said, sure. So we went on and we started playing the kind of intro scenario in La Patrie, and where the coalition has to defend this little village, and they just get completely overrun. But as we were playing it, we would run into like a rules question, and then we would say, well, what does the model like suggest should happen? And then we would like, well, let's just do that. And then we check the rules later and be like, oh, well, that is actually how the rules work. And we just kept hitting these moments where it felt so resonant with the period, and we just kept playing them. And so suddenly we were like going through all the scenarios in Napoleon Invades Spain, and like we're playing the Brienne La Rothiere campaign, and Drew and I are in the middle of the big La Patrie campaign, and I'm like probably going to start a game of 4 Lost Battles pretty soon. And I have just it just swallowed me whole. And it's the elegance of the system, I think, is really remarkable. And this is where I bet I'm going to start getting myself into trouble. And I don't know if I'll get myself into trouble with this group, but I've already gotten myself in trouble with other groups, which is the clarity of the simulation at a level of scale, I think, is really remarkable, because you don't have full control. And that means sometimes people don't move when you want them to move. And this to me is the best and most brilliant thing about the system. And so when I read the little optional rule that says, well, if your guy is this far away, he can attack if you want, I'm like, no, absolutely not. I will never play with that optional rule, because the system is telling me they could be lost in a cornfield or their maps are bad. And I would be more comfortable with a rule that said there's an equal chance of them moving backwards as forwards. And so it's better just for, if we cancel those things out, we give the absolute value of that as 0, and we'll just say they sit still on the map. Like I'm more comfortable with that. But yeah, so it's been kind of a whole long chain. And then actually the one thing I didn't mention here, which is the other game that I can't believe I forgot about, but when I was in Texas, I played the 7 Days, which is the 1809 campaign. Yeah. And I liked that game a lot. And then what blew my mind is I had kind of forgotten about that game. And I had this moment where I was like, I'm going to go back and reread those rules. And I was like, oh my God, they're the same rules, basically. And it's something so beautiful about the design of his games that the same rule set with almost no modifications works so well at 2 different scales.
Yes.
As soon as you bring up 1809, you're singing Jim's song.
Yeah, I get a little verklempt. Go on, but do go on.
No, but do go. I just miss it. It's just I think it points to, and I don't want to I'm out of my. I'm not a military historian, but Zucker to me is suggesting something about the fractal logic of conflict in this period. Mm-hmm. That the same dynamics you see happening at the 500-yard hex are happening at the mile hex, and it's just so beautiful. And so it's beautiful the way like a piece of music can be beautiful, where it's this like essential truth of a thing is being revealed. And one of the projects that Drew and I are now involved in is I told Drew, I was like, well, let's do the Champagnat big campaign from La Patrie, the 2 giant. We're doing the whole thing. We're about a third through. Yeah, it's a giant map. And we're just, we work on it during lunch or whatever on the weekends. And bless Vassal for making that possible, because I'm not going to be able to set that up in my house.
I was going to say, what's that house?
How long is that lunch?
Well, yeah, one of the things that, well, I'll talk about that in a second, but I said, Drew, after we do this campaign, I want to play 6 Days of Glory and do the exact same campaign at basically like a few steps back. And after we do that, let's play Napoleon a bit, because I want to really understand the depth of this picture that's being presented, because there's an amazing thing that happens when I was reading the 7 Days, when I was reading that rule book and thinking about how the counters in that game are divisions, and how, of course, in the Library of Napoleonic Battles, you might have 3 or 4 counters per division. Mm-hmm. And I just started thinking about, I really zoomed in on the map, and I looked at the map in 6 Days of Glory and compared it to the maps in La Patrie. And I said, look at how it's replicating the same type of give and take, the same type of movement at different scales with fewer pieces, but then it's like showing the macro trend. I mean, it's like Conway's Game of Life or something.
Oh man. Okay. Whoa. Okay. Yeah.
So I think it's remarkable. And to me, I'm a sucker for anytime I see a person or a group of people throw themselves at a huge project, like on that is measured in the scale of like decades and lifetimes. I get misty eyed. That's the thing that does it for me. Like, I love it's like the Dwarf Fortress guys, right? Like, when they're working on a project.
Kevin Zucker has not received a check for $14 million. So
yeah, but someday, man. And that's the thing. It doesn't always pay off. I mean, this is all like, kind of the very beginning of the conversation. There's a reason I brought up Caro. It's like the same type of work. Mm-hmm. And when I was looking at when I was starting to read Zucker's work and then play the games, I was like, oh, this is an enterprise that is on such a different scale from the one I normally can appreciate. And it's so wonderful to see it executed. I mean, to the level it is. I mean, it's amazing. I've got a bunch of them now, and I love opening up and exploring and just thinking like, wow, this is like just another chapter in this big book that I'm exploring. That all said, I mean, we could talk about the less fun parts about the design.
Jim, we've had the same conversation of scale and zooming in and zooming out with David and Stennis, talking about the our system, and the how many Napoleonic folks don't get it because it's zoomed farther out than they're used to.
I mean, the whole conversation about attrition, I think, and this is what I mean about getting myself into trouble. I run to people who are like, I mean, this is the whole thing about the Sumter rules. There's like the alternate set, which I read and I thought, well, these seem fine, but like I'm not really interested in playing with them because they seem like they want a game at like the Hexasim level and not what's being presented.
What gives people the itch more than anything, and this certainly includes luminaries like Kev Sharp and smart guys. I mean, these are guys who know a lot about games. They don't like the bloodlessness of the combat.
Sure. And
they don't quite understand what Kev is doing at that level. I think the first thing, and what Kev Zucker is doing at that level, I think your point about the fractal nature of it is absolutely critical. Because if you play them in time, what I'm saying is if you start playing with La Patrie and you make your way forward in time, you will watch armies become increasingly more difficult to manage. Mm-hmm. You will see Napoleon and his commanders struggle with the units that they've got to keep them under control. By the time you get to Wagram and things like that, the armies are simply too big for his Napoleonic structure. And you feel that, and you feel that challenge. The combat, especially because for me, it's always situated at the brigade level. I love all the others. I think I probably do agree with Bruce Garrick that Highway to the Kremlin is probably his greatest design.
I just started reading it. I've got it. Yeah.
In terms of what he did in Caps, I still love Napoleon's Last Battles more. But in terms of creating a simulation, if you will, if that's not the wrong word, of an impossible to simulate situation, it's a classic. And when you do that and you play through that game, you really do get a sense the combat becomes secondary. Mm-hmm. It's important, it's there, but it takes second place to the maneuver, to the command control, to what you said, the simple question of move, you guy there. No, I'm not going to.
At that scale, you got to feed your army.
Well, it's keeping the plate spinning. So no,
well, I mean, it runs into it's this question about the role of attrition in these games, and then also, so I mean, the thing that I think about from a design perspective is health bars in war games, right?
Sure.
So at some scales, I think that there's a desire to want to measure things like morale, enthusiasm, but also just how many people you happen to have standing on that line, and to measure it very precisely. But when you start looking at the amount of people who are composing a strength point, you're like, well, like you don't, what really matters is like the unit's physical position, its command status, and then if it's been rallied once. If it's like broken once, and that to me, like at that scale, the attrition stuff doesn't matter because you're not at the right zoom. And so I think, and this is why it's very, I just started learning about I think it's the Rising Eagles, Falling Eagles games. Which I have some friends who really like them, and I read the rules. They seem fascinating. Not really, not at the scale that I'm thrilled by, but that is a scale that is more appropriate potentially, which is about twice the level of zoom as something like the library, where you do start caring about like how many of your guys are dead. And I'll be interested to kind of explore more, but at the this actually gets me to an adjacent point, which is the thing that I find really remarkable about these games. And this is, so I played over the weekend. I sat down and played Nemesis, which is a big plastic Kickstarter-y game that is basically like Alien, but a board game. And it was, I had a good time. It was fun, but there were more phases in that game than in the Library of Napoleonic Battles. And more damning still, it took longer to resolve a turn. There was just this like heaviness to the design. And what I'm finding really remarkable about the library is that when Drew and I sit down and play it over lunch, we'll knock out 2 turns in an hour or 3 sometimes, because we just play quickly, and we're not trying to be perfect. We're not trying to say what's the optimal move. We're saying, look, this is a casual game. We're much more interested in the experience, the whiff of grape shot. So let's make maybe our moves are suboptimal, but let's play a little quickly. And when you play at that speed, the whole, what you were saying about the armies like becoming scattered, you like see it. And I could see if people were really very carefully like trying to play them as if they were chess matches where they're really analyzing every position and move, that it would feel like I am making moves that are 5% better than your moves. I should be getting 5% more. And it's like, no, you make different kinds of gambles and you made a maneuver, maybe it didn't work. You got to swing a little bit bigger. And then the actual, like all the rules kind of fall away and the actual design is so clean. Despite the fact that it has, I'll just say, like one of the worst UX designs I've ever seen. It's insane. And I get that there are reasons for why it's the way.
Well, but it also hasn't. Honestly, how much has it evolved since Napoleon's last battles?
Yeah,
yeah.
It is small stuff like the order of battles used to set up. I'm like, I can't handle these anymore. I just desperately like it's been a long time. Before I started designing games, I did a lot of like redraws, and I sometimes I'll get an itch where I'm like, oh, I just want to redo all these tables to make them clear. And it's been a while since I felt that itch, but Drew and I were working on we were playing one of the vassal mods. That was like one of the earlier ones. I think actually Napoleon Invades Spain, the vassal module is an early version of what many of the other vassal modules that have been branched off of it. And it's just kind of like hard to use because the tables are weirdly labeled and in the wrong order and all these like very small things that people don't care about. But I had this moment where I was like, yeah, like the demoralization track, like why are there so, he's trying to save paper. I get it. But like there are other ways, it's coming at a cost. And so part of me wants to like, ask myself what a UI overhaul would look like that isn't trying to like make things look pretty, because I actually think they're beautiful. They're gorgeous games. They have some of the best information design in wargaming. But I do think that some of the supplementary stuff could be cleaned.
Yeah, no. Look, I will go a long, long way, but I won't defend those tables. I won't. And I do wonder, and I've never, I've had a few chats with him, with Kevin Tucker online, but I've never engaged him in anything approaching the level of conversation we're even having tonight. But I would love to know. It's like when he did those things for SPI, they figured out a different way to do it.
Yeah.
And I realized they were of their time, but there's a reinforcement track right along the side of the map.
Yes. No, when I compared the Days series, like, the map for 6 Days of Glory is very hard to read. It's beautiful, but it is difficult to decipher. But the UI for it is great. It's right along the side of the board, right where you kind of
exactly.
need it.
Well, even the map itself, right? It's that middle range. It's that late SPI, early TSR, what the heck is that color palette? They're nothing approaching how lovely those maps are now, because they're really lovely now.
No, I think it's the maps, and I can't remember the artist that does them all, but they are my favorite Hex Encounter maps. They're gorgeous.
And they reward study. And the thing is, and I will always say this about Kevin Zucker, if there's a rise somewhere, if there's a ditch somewhere, it's there. Mm-hmm. And he has a reason for, or it was there. And he has a reason for thinking it was.
Yeah.
They're incredibly well thought out. You've really got me thinking about it in a whole different way, because you're right. It is the result of 50 years now? Approaching 50 years, polishing one thing.
Well, and this actually, it gets back to a point I wanted to make earlier, which is when I was first, when I was following Zucker's work from a distance, and I was kind of bummed out by all these tactical games he was working on, because I didn't want that. I wanted more big campaign games. I want to feed my troops harder, right? Like I love those kind of puzzles. But now I'm kind of approaching them with this new angle, which says, here's the person who has spent the majority of their life thinking about this period of conflict and how the battles were decided. And this person says, this is the scale. This is the proper scale. And like the interview that I like want to see with Zucker, or the piece by him I want to read, is like the justification for the scale, because he could have spent this portion of his career going back and republishing all of his campaign games and cleaning them up and making them very beautiful, or doing that with the Days series, which I adore, and which many people love the Days games. But he said no. He wants to do these 525-yard hex games. And what I think the answer is that this is the best scale to do the approach to battle, I think, because and there have been a few scenarios. I mean, the game that I love, if I have to teach someone how to play the game, the scenario I like using is Vimero.
Okay.
Because it's hard for the French, but it's hard for both sides if you don't really know what you're doing. And it's very clear. Like, I always play the approach to battle, which just starts like 3 or 4 turns. So it's not even that much longer. It just starts 3 or 4 turns earlier. And the approach to battle is great because you give a new player Juno and you say, okay, you're trying to take Vimero. Here's how you're going to get your victory points. You could take the supply points. You could try to demoralize the army, but like really, this is a hard battle to win unless you take Vimero. And so how are you going to do that? And you just you don't even put pieces on the board. You just talk about the map, and pretty soon you get okay, there's kind of 2 ways to do it. But maybe there's a third way, and then it starts opening up well, you've got a little bit of time, and there's some of these unknowns come into play, and it's that conversation about the approach, the night before battle where everyone's got the maps out and you're just talking about the battle in theory, that I think that this scale really excels at. And that kind of disappears when you have to spend all your time worrying about if your units are going to form squares at the proper moment.
Well, some years ago, I gave a presentation at the War College, sponsored by the Armchair Dragoons, at Origins, and the presentation was how big for Boney, which was basically what's the proper scale, if such a thing there be, for depicting Napoleonic conflict on the tabletop or on using a standard war game. And I came down to the answer. I guess it's unsurprising, and who knows, it maybe was a self-fulfilling prophecy, but it was the brigade level. I think at that point, you get to the point where an actual Napoleonic commander would have thought, and the idea that it was originally Richard Bodley Scott in the great De Bellis Antiquitatis who taught us. He said, "Look, there is no universe in which Alexander the Great was looking down the field and going, wait a minute, how many of those peltasts just died?" It just doesn't happen that way, and it's no different in a Napoleonic battlefield. Casualty sheets were for the next day.
Yeah.
And that whole process and that whole thing, that's wow.
Well, and I think that and this goes back to Chandler. Chandler talks about how if you're trying to understand, Napoleon becomes this really convenient figure because you see this level of excellence at the tactical, grand tactical, operational, and strategic. And of course, it's not even across all of those. But if you want to appreciate someone like Napoleon, you have to find the right register to appreciate him.
Yes.
and it ends up being something like the brigade level, right? Or something like the operational level. Both two areas where, I think he clearly displays genius. And or to a more recent example is like Ron Chernow's biography of Grant, where that book begins by saying, like, his argument is that Grant's the greatest U.S. general, and it's because he's the only general who excels at all the different essentially scales, and which is interesting. It's an interesting claim, but it also the reason why, outside of one might disagree or agree with that claim, but where the claim is useful is because it forces us to ask the question, what does the battlefield look like inside the principal actor's head? And then how do you actually like create that? And this is, when I'm ever talking about historical games, I always say that, historical games in some respects are very easy because you're always just answering two questions. And the first question is, who are the actors? And the second question is, what are they worried about? And everything else comes out of that. And I feel like where where games of any type go astray for me personally is when I feel like those questions stop being asked as rigorously. And this is how you get to something like Squad Leader.
And I want someone of your ability to take a look at that question in the future. Mark that down. I know you have nothing else to do.
Yeah, I'm very.
It's to me that question that you raise, what does the headspace of the commander look like, is insufficiently explored. And maybe I'm being unfair, but I've played enough war games to know, Napoleonic and otherwise, that don't try, for example, Simmons's games, they actually took a serious shot at it, right?
Yes, I think so.
Rachel's work.
If you tried that, you're going to end up scaring off a lot of the players that are used to the God's eye view, and anything that hampers that, they're going to see as somehow penalizing the players or hamstringing the players for not being able to do everything they want to do, while simultaneously ignoring how ahistorical that is. That you just can't do everything you want to do. So,
I mean, my favorite design about the Second World War by far is Craig Basink's Triumph and Tragedy. I adore it. And the reason I adore it is because all World War II games, even the ones that can get wild, they're all so they're like in an apologetic tradition. I don't know how else to describe it. They treat the war like a Shakespearean play, like a passion play or something, that they're going to we're going to go through the stations of the cross as we fight, okay, genuflect before D-Day. Let's fight. Let's fight the Battle of the Bulge. And what I love about Triumph and Tragedy is the people fighting World War II didn't realize they were fighting World War II. And in fact, it starts to explain that nobody went, oh, hey, everybody, it's time to start a world war. It was this runaway car accident, this 100-nation pileup. And I love the lead up to Triumph and Tragedy, because even people who have played Triumph and Tragedy dozens of times will find themselves saying things like, well, maybe I can just coast this to an economic victory. Maybe we don't need to get in this, but this is just a small thing. I'll let this slide. And so it does a great job of putting players in the mindset that views what happened as essentially like an accident. Yeah. And I think that, to me, and this gets into broader questions of understanding history, is you want to really understand possibility, and which is why I have found, and this isn't really a critique of the Library of Napoleonic Battles at all. It's just the battle scenarios tend to if you play the battle scenario for any particular scenario, what happened historically tends to be what happens. They are, there isn't as much game there. There's still interesting puzzles and questions, but the game comes alive with those approach to battle scenarios, where suddenly you're like, I'm going to take a different gambit. And actually, the ones I haven't played these yet, but some of the scenarios in Four Lost Battles have me so excited, because they include two armies they're like in encounter engagements where both of the armies are off board at the start.
Yeah.
And so then you're asking questions about march order and position and what their intents are. You're really engaging the game's fog of war system. And again, I haven't played them yet, but I'm like, I think this has got to be exactly where the heart, the beating heart of the whole system is. Because even I've just started using some of the alternate reinforcements and getting a little bit into the mode cards. I haven't done the other cards, just the modes. But that is enough noise that it's exhilarating to not know what the reinforcement schedule is. Mm-hmm. Because it's just taking me a lot closer. And in the dream, this is why I was so interested in the Flight of the Eagles. The essential problem, especially these 9th century war games, is the problem of the double blind game. And board games are just bad at it. I think it requires so much sort of design superstructure to get to work. I mean, y'all know you have
you need to come hang out with us sometime.
You did notice my avatar is from Rice Fits, yeah.
Yes.
Just saying. Just saying. I'm sympathetic to your concerns.
Well,
we do double blind, we do semi-blind, we do multi-blind. If you can blind it, we've blinded it.
Well, and I go ahead, Brant.
I was going to say your comment about the approach march, I think is absolutely spot on, and it's something that not near enough wargamers really appreciate. And it's almost I get that you've got a bit of a wargaming background in your personal life, but the vast majority of wargamers aren't going to know you as a wargame designer. They're going to know you
sure.
as again the war in the petting zoo. But still, the approach march or lack thereof is the reason that I won't. I'm not a big fan of most Civil War games. I will never touch a Gettysburg game. I won't. The way the Gettysburg games are set up with the exact order of battle that was present at the fight are 1,000% boring and 1,000% predetermined. The folks that showed up on the battlefield on July 1st, that's it. Like, the Confederates are going to lose. They don't have the terrain. They don't have the people. It's done. And you can claim that they kind of sort of won the game if they exceed their historical outcome.
Right.
Got it. But how many Gettysburg games actually include Jeb Stuart's cavalry that, were like fucking off 50 miles away looking for shoes instead of like having them as an option at the battle? How many Gettysburg games give you the option to fight Gettysburg not at Gettysburg, that this collision between two accidental armies happened 50 miles down the road instead of at Gettysburg itself? And that approach march that you're talking about gives you the opportunity to figure that out. Whereas, most of those games that you open it up, you already know what's going to happen. Like, as soon as you open the box, you know what's going to happen. There's a couple of really gorgeous Gettysburg games out there. A couple of them recently released by designers who are friends of mine. I ain't going anywhere near them, and I'm not recommending anybody else do it because they're on rails. There's nothing to them.
Well, and even Simmons's
rice cake of military gaming. It's empty calories.
Well, and this is a place where I adore Rachel Simmons's work. I mean, Napoleon's Triumph is a game I've played a lot. I love Bonaparte at Marengo, which I prefer to Napoleon's Triumph just because it is so snappy and so easy to play.
Yeah. Agreed.
I mean, I think I've probably played it 10 times more, and I like both of them, but I do think that they both fall slightly into scale traps where with Napoleon's Triumph and Bonaparte Marengo, but especially Napoleon's Triumph, it does kind of like boil the game down to like a few essential gambits, but you kind of know what those gambits are going in, and what happens when you take that zoom out in scale, you're like, well, now I can kind of decide what my big gambits are going to be, and that to me, that is really taking me like right to the field. And it, and I don't know. There are all types of folks in this hobby, and it's just the thing that most excites me about it is that sense of possibility, like the chaos of the moment. I mean, this is why one of my favorite, and this is a game I've talked about a lot in other things, but I love Mark McLaughlin's The Napoleonic Wars, which is is an utter nonsense piece of design, but it's just wonderful because to me it captures the spirit of the age. Like, you go into that game not knowing when it's going to end, not knowing, what's going to, you throw the giant bucket of dice and maybe you get an Austerlitz and maybe you get a Wagram or maybe you get a Leipzig, and you just have to deal. And there's a speed to it, but the thing that it does really well, I think, is the romantic possibility that for the people guiding these nations at this time, suddenly something was unhinged and it felt like kind of anything was possible. And that game captures it so well in a way that a lot of other Napoleonic war games are trapped in what I've come to recognize as the kind of like specter of World War II. And this is something I just read the Andrew Roberts biography of Napoleon. And there's a brilliant introduction where he just talks about how basically the mid 20th century kind of screwed up our understanding of the 19th. And when I was reading that, I instantly just thought about all of these war games I've played that just feel like Axis and Allies with Shakos. where you've got a giant glob of French units in the middle of the map, and they kind of push out on all the sides, and they kind of run out of supplies, and they get pushed back in. And how that doesn't capture the uncertainty of it all, right? And I think that the McLaughlin does a really good job of that at a macro scale, and Zucker does a great job at the absolute ground level.
And as you well know, there are people who hate that game for that.
Oh, I know. Look, I've landed Swedes in Ireland. I've seen the look on their faces.
This is it. It's my personal favorite is the Russo-French alliance.
Yeah, it's the best.
Yeah,
it's the new Entente.
You can pull off. You can pull off
invasion of York. Yeah,
you could pull off the Russo-French alliance. No, that's right. No, and for me, offering the elevator pitch for Flight of the Eagle, because we're on our third actually now. We're doing Friedland right now, 1807.
Okay,
and we're what about 6 months in, I think.
Okay, I was about to ask how long this was. Cole probably isn't aware of it. Jim has run some of these play-by-email Kriegspiels that have lasted longer than some marriages. And I'm not wrong.
No, you're not. And
we're not talking Hollywood marriages either.
Yeah, mine is good despite all that stuff. But there it is, as is yours. But no, the thing that I love about it, probably more than anything else, is that sense of, all right, I know roughly where they are. I think I know where my guys are. I know what the limits of their capacity to move is. How will I persuade them to get to the point where I need them as quickly as possible?
Mm-hmm.
And when you get to let that play out over, as is the case now, a map of Central Europe that basically encompasses Poland, East Prussia, and a little bit of, the Niemen River's the Eastern Gap. So, when you've got that much territory to play around, it is. Well, to me, and I'm the umpire, so I don't even get the wonder of it. I just get to watch them like Gomez Adams watching his trains. I get to watch that. It is, I think, to borrow your term, exhilarating. It's very cool.
Yeah,
and I'll tell you what, Zach's going to have a devil of a time with the show notes for this one, with all of the obscure references that we are going to end up making on this episode.
Very, very proud of these things.
The Gomez Adams one, that's a brand new one for any of our podcasts. I mean, bravo, Jim.
It really bring new media into the war game space.
Guys, we're well past the hour and a half that I'd asked y'all to commit to tonight's episode. It's not hard to get Jim to just keep going on Napoleonic topics. At a certain point, StreamYard's going to run out of recording space if we let Jim just keep going.
Yeah, I thought we were going to spend so much time talking about the artillery bombardment table, but we can save that.
Man, I got notes.
So, and probably got them in more than one language. So,
good point.
Yeah. Cole, this has been fascinating. No, seriously, thank you very much for joining us and for sticking around an extra couple of minutes. And we are absolutely going to pester you to come back and join us again on another episode down the line, because this is great. And if you make it to Origins this year, I'm happy to buy a beer and let's just sit down and BS over some more games at some point.
That sounds great. I really appreciate being on the show. It's so I don't get to do this very often, so I have a blast.
We just need to peer pressure Jim into showing up at Origins.
There you go.
Next year, Jim, maybe.
No, well, it all depends what happens. I'm not even kidding a little when I say it all depends entirely what happens in Ukraine, because I am devil determined to get to Friedland. That's my next stop. So
yeah. So let's get a peace treaty signed in a hurry, folks.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, because Jim needs to travel, so solve world's problems for that reason. There you go.
Yes, exactly. Jim, what's the by the time people are listening to this, Tabletop said, whatever you're doing this week will be in the rearview mirror. But what are the next couple of things we've got lined up on Saturday Night Fights or Wednesday Night Warfare?
Well, we are working through. Speaking of double blind, we're playing Artie Conleff's Spearhead, a 1944 June double blind game, 3 players on a side, and it's you wonder why you love double blind. I just had an entire infantry company walk on top of another one, leaving myself and David Pumphouse to sort that out. That was great. We are continuing to be playtesters for Jervis Johnson's Valor and Fortitude. They're in a beta 2.1, and we're going to be playtesting that the next couple of Wednesdays. And we're firing up the next, Chain of Command, pint-sized campaign. This time, Kampfgruppe von Luck. Talk about genuflecting. I am stealing that, Cole. I'm going to have to send you $1 every time I do it. Genuflect. At
Stations of the Cross.
At the Stations of the Cross. Genuflecting at the Stations of the Cross of World War II. We are deep in the heart. We are June 6th, 1944, just a little bit west of Caen as the 6th Airborne goes up against Kampfgruppe von Luck. So that's what's coming up soon online.
All right. And so, Cole, you've given us a heads up on what some of the games coming are going to be. I know you can't give away any like super surprise releases at any of the conventions, so I'm not.
Unless they're Napoleonic, in which case I insist.
No, the only plug I've got is that if you're interested in any of the historical work, you should do yourself a favor and join the Whirligig and Friends Discord. I can provide a link to y'all. It is a great place to meet up for historical games of all types, from the Hex Encounter stuff to the lighter, more Euro-y stuff. And it's also the place where Drew and I do a lot of our development kind of out in the public. So, everything that I've announced so far, none of it surprises the folks who hang around that Discord.
Gotcha. So yeah, once Cole gets that link over to us, we will link it to this show. Don't forget, for a lot of what Jim does, you can toss your hat in the ring either in our forums or in our Discord. Jim does a lot of the audio through his own other separate Discord, but he's happy to take signups or people that are interested in participating from our Discord, from YouTube comments, from all over the place. So he's rounded up quite a collection of folks that regularly join him for gaming. And sooner or later, we're going to get at least one of these dudes branch off and start like the franchise of, the one of the side franchises for Saturday Night Fights, and we'll have multiple games running on Saturday nights. Probably Pump House is your best bet, huh?
I would think so.
Or maybe Brooks might could do it.
Oh yeah.
So we got to lean on these guys to get it ramped up. Audience, thank you very much for joining us on this great discussion. Again, sorry we got to cut it off here at some point because the editor guy has to go back through all of this and cut out himself saying so many times. Cole, welcome back anytime. Jim, you're coming back later this season anyway because it's already on the calendar. And audience, please join us again next week for another episode of Mentioned in Dispatches.